Unemployed and Afraid acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this episode on and of the land where you, the listener, are tuning in from. We would like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and extend our respect to any First Nations, Aboriginal, and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today, acknowledging that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid, a podcast that explores the messy middle of being out on your own and starting over with the people who've done it. I'm your host, Kim Curtin. Thank you for being here. Let's get into today's story of starting over. A big welcome to you for another episode of Unemployed and Afraid, the stories of starting over into a career that is built just for you. Today's episode had me smiling and lolling away when I was packaging it up for you because my guest, Ash, is just super real, funny, and nails the vibe of what it means to go after something that's speaking to you, no matter how messy it gets along the way. And she shows how much the mess is really worth it. In this episode, we chat about how a creative spark can start one way and then end up very differently, how the people you need to help you on the journey have an uncanny way of appearing just when you need them, and why it's important to embrace the lows just as much as the highs, both of which are inevitable when you're on this epic journey. Ash joins us from her fashion label warehouse. So there's a few little warehousey vibes in the background for ambience. I quite like it. It feels kind of like we're part of her team. And I hope you enjoy my chat with Ash as much as I enjoyed creating it for you. If you do, make sure to leave us a review. Here is my chat with Ash on her story of starting over. Joining us from picturesque beach town of Yamba on the east coast of New South Wales is designer and founder of Summi Summi, Ashley Vallis. Ash creates pieces for every woman that will feature in their wardrobe on rotation forever. Pieces that are consciously produced from natural cotton-based fabrics and sewn together by the loving hands of a family-owned factory in small quantities. The Summi Summi brand and seasonless signatures, such as terry toweling sets, and linen ensembles are loved and warmed by women around the world. From a hobby business in kids fashion to the Summi Summi of today, bold and bright, stocked in over 30 stores, loved by some big names and with some killer collection titles like Serotonin, my personal favorite, Good Thanks, and Mr. Hadimi. I feel like there's going to be some very good vibes in this chat and some good stories. Ash, I'm so looking forward to hearing your story of starting over. Welcome to Unemployed and Afraid.
Thank you.
So we're going to kick off with a little warm-up question, just something to kind of settle us into the chat. Tell me, how would your husband describe you?
Do you want the truth? Or
Absolutely, I do.
Oh, do you want 3 words? I'll do a 3-word one. Describe me as stubborn. So stubborn, he would say. Maybe funny. I think he laughs at me a lot. And probably rude. His name is Khan. Khan and I have a very 80 years married vibe about us, bickering all the time. We actually own a cafe together as well. I don't know if you knew that. So sometimes when we're working together, it's pretty gnarly.
Well, it's a pretty good sign that you're still together. Okay, so let's go back to pre-Summi Summi. Before all that, who were you?
Oh, God, that's a long time ago now. Like pre-children. That's when the brand started with my first daughter. So before that, I was so much fun. I was a flight attendant. I was actually young before all of this. I feel like I had a really short period of time where I was young and free, but that's all right because that's how it was supposed to go. But yeah, I flew for Virgin and that's how I met my partner, Khan. But I also feel like I was a really old person. Like I'd go out, but I was always the one that went home at 9 p.m. or I passed out really early. I was always at home. I never really cared about partying that hard. I always wanted like a pizza on the couch type situation.
So you were a flight attendant and I imagine that was pretty full on like schedule, up and down, kind of a little bit all over the place?
Yeah, no routine. I liked that. I liked my days off through the week. I liked being overseas, nights away. Maybe that's why when I was home, I really just wanted to be at home because of that.
What drew you to pull away from flight attending, from working for Virgin?
I got pregnant. Nothing in my life has been planned. I'm a very wing it person. I think Khan and I had only been together for 6 months when I found out. But rewind a little bit, we were together and he was a flight attendant too. And a lady on the plane actually stopped him one day and said, "I'm so sorry, I never do this. I'm actually a psychic and I can see 2 little girls running around your legs." And he was like, "Well, that's weird," because he actually had sons He goes, I've got sons, so you're wrong. And she goes, no, I know you have sons. You're having more children. He was like, no, I'm not. And she was like, yeah, and it's going to happen soon. And he was like, okay, yeah, whatever. And he came home and told me, and I was like, yeah, she's crazy. And it was a couple of months later, I found out I was pregnant.
I'm going to assume you had a girl.
Yeah, two.
Wow. I love stories like that. It makes me want to go see a psychic, but also not at all.
Yeah. It kind of all happened really fast. And I feel like that psychic played a part because I was only 24 and I was like, what am I going to do about it? So up in the air, but it just kept playing back in my head. And I was like, I just had this crazy, strong feeling like this was supposed to happen. And we lived in Cronulla. I grew up in the Sutherland Shire, and the cost of living there is insane. And my partner, Khan, had 2 sons, 3 sons, that's another story. And they all lived in Yamba. And I said, well, let's do it. And let's just all be in Yamba. And we could also afford a house. So
Yamba looks like a really beautiful place. I have been casually stalking rentals in Yamba for actually ever since I met Sophie, previous guest and good friend of yours from This Is Intense. I've been looking at Yamba. I imagine it would have been just a completely different change of pace for you.
It was, and even 7 years ago, it was so different back then. I remember sitting in town in the middle of winter thinking, I don't know about it. It was a ghost town, and it's changed so much since then. And now I'd never go back to Sydney. I moved up here 10 days after having her. So I was 24, I'd had a baby. My whole life was in Sydney. And I remember I got on the plane, my mum flew out with me 10 days after having her. And it was actually could have been in a movie. It was so intense. Mum flew up on the flight with me, but she was still working. So she flew up on the flight. I got off the plane at Coffs Harbour, and she was actually on the flight straight back down. So she got off the plane, kissed us goodbye, and then turned around and went back through security. And I was like, what have I done? My whole support network and everything just gone. And we don't even live in Yamba. We live in Palmer's Island, which is even more remote, I guess. I remember the first night I could hear every single insect, every single animal outside. And I was like, oh my God. But yeah, it was 6 months and I was a bit lost, I guess. And that's when I had the idea to do something.
Tell me about that first inkling to create. What happened for you there?
I think I was just kind of like, oh yeah, I can start a business. Like, didn't think much of it. And I had a baby. So I was like, oh, well, maybe I can make. The very first idea was maybe I could make bed sheets, like cot sheets. And then I never did that, but it just kept ticking over. Oh, maybe I could do this, or maybe I could do that. Then I kept saying it to Khan. And then one day he was like, go and do it. And I was like, oh, what do you mean? And he was like, get up and go and do something about it. And I was like, oh, okay, I will. And then it started with kids' clothes.
Wow. Did you have design in your life at this stage? Or was this just literally like, I'm going to sit here and think and I'm going to throw some ideas around and see what feels good?
Well, I remember when I was pregnant, when her name's Tippy, my first daughter, I was just wanting to buy heaps of cute stuff. And I felt like back then there wasn't that much. It was before every other person decided to do the same thing. And then I had another friend who was a flight attendant who was doing women's clothing. And because I knew it was a very shut off world, like you couldn't just go and ask, hey, who's your contact? But she was a friend, so I felt that I could ask her, and I didn't want to compete with what she was doing. So she actually gave me the contact of my first factory. So that's how I had the confidence to sort of start, I guess. But no, I had no design, anything, no knowledge.
That's pretty gutsy. How did you get started? What was the first step that you took?
I just emailed the guy and I was like, this is what I want to do. And I feel like he really spoon-fed me. He was like, this is what I need, blah, 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 blah. And I designed a really tiny little capsule of baby kids' clothes.
I'm really fascinated by this, and this might be a slightly selfish question because I always feel very inclined to draw something or to paint something, but
oh my God,
I stop because I'm like, I'm going to be shit and whatever, like I don't actually have anything to do, like to write down. Did you have that feeling? Like how did that play out for you to actually put pen to paper?
I sketched a few things and like I'm no artist. I think people would be very surprised to find how some things come about. Like it's not professional to start with anyway, but you know, you get there in the end. But my mum actually has the design. She was a model and then she started out sewing wedding dresses on a factory floor. So I feel like I got that from her.
So maybe it was in you and you didn't quite know yet because you hadn't maybe actually tried.
Yeah.
So your first piece that you got drawn out, for example, firstly, do you still have that piece of paper? Do you keep that to look back on?
I feel like I would have it somewhere. I mean, you would be mortified if you saw my filing cabinet at home.
I can probably relate. Don't worry.
I feel like it's somewhere for sure.
Is it a kind of process where you go through it and it comes out of your head, or do you kind of have it in your head first and then you're mirroring it with what you're creating? Like, how does it sort of land on the paper for you?
I feel like I could like have some inspiration from somewhere, then it's in my head and then I'll put it down and then I send that to the factory. And sometimes the factory will just put their own twist on something. I'd be like, well, I didn't ask for that, but it's pretty good. So something else will turn up that works even better.
I think there's a lot to be said about the creative or the ideation process in general, where you start with something and the something isn't always where you end up in the end of it. It just kind of has its own life force once it comes out of you. So you sent it off to the factory and got a couple of samples back. What happens with those? What happened next?
I think I was super naive. I was like, oh, well, I'll order this many because look how cute they are. Like they'll sell like that. It'll be so easy. And I think I had a market stall in Yamba and I was like, oh, I don't think I have enough stock. People will be coming in and I'll be selling everything so fast. And I think I sold 3 things the entire time. And I was like, oh, okay, so it's actually not that easy. It's actually really hard. And then I just kept doing markets.
Did you have the Summi Summi brand at this stage or did that come later?
It was called Tippy and Zep. So that was my first daughter and our dog.
Great names.
Yeah. Cute. But I was doing the markets and Instagram. But like I didn't have money to start this. I think I had $2,000 savings and I think I borrowed $2,000 off my parents. And I quickly learned that you kind of need money to make money. And I was doing it the slow, hard way. And this was all while I was on maternity leave. So I kind of had the time and I had, that income from the government, whatever it was, $600 a week. So I felt safe in doing that. And then when that ended and I hadn't made $1 million, like I thought I had to get a job.
How did that feel?
A bit deflating because I think also I had this idea in my head, like my parents had spent so much money. I went to a private girls' school in Sydney. They never had expectations put on me. I didn't feel that pressure from them, but to end up in a small town with a part-time job and a baby at 24, I felt like a bit of a flop. And I'm not saying that job is a bad job or anything. It just made me sad.
What was the job that you had at that time?
I was a bank teller. The fluorescent lighting and the polyester uniform and counting money every day. I was like, this is just, I didn't expect to end up here. And I knew since I was young that I couldn't be in an office. I've had every office job under the sun, receptionist, whatever. And I hated them all. So I thought, how am I going to do this forever? But I just kept going on the side with the clothes because it was fun. I was like, I wasn't actually making money, but I was making really cute clothes. So I just kind of kept doing it.
Your days, I imagine, would have been pretty full then, a young baby and a little side hustle.
Yeah. And I mean, I felt like I didn't put 100% into the business. It was kind of like whenever I felt like it. So it was all right. I had to start doing that when my daughter was 9 months old. So I basically was dropping my baby off at daycare, which sucked, but it was a really good daycare, so that was fine, but like it's just felt crappy. And then going to the bank, but the people I worked with were really nice, so I wasn't like sad. I live in a beautiful town, I have a beautiful family, but this isn't what I want to be doing. Yeah. And I also didn't know how we could stay there and keep going with that.
What started to shift for you then? How did things start to turn?
I think it's my stubbornness. I was like, I know I'm not making any money with this side thing, but I'm also not giving up on it. I remember saying to one of the girls, if I could just make $100 or $200 extra a week, I'll be happy. So it just started off with that tiny little goal. And then I got pregnant. Whoops. So then I went on maternity leave again. And I kept going with it. And then the collections were kind of getting a bit better and a bit better. And then I started getting wholesale inquiries, but I wasn't ready to take them on. And then while I was on maternity leave, actually the bank closed down and I got paid out a redundancy package.
Andy?
So it was a bit of cash. And I had a few people say, what if you made this in a woman's size? And I was like, oh, I don't know, women's bodies are so hard, the measurements, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know how it would work. And I just did one just to have a look and it looked really good. So I made a few and they all sold out and I was like, oh, I actually made a profit from that. And then so I made a really small range and they were just bodysuits. And I remember I followed Ruby Matthews, Ruby Tuesday. And at the time, she just had her PO box in her Instagram. And I thought, oh, what have I got to lose? And I sent her one and she loved it and she posted it and she tagged the brand. And overnight, my Instagram grew by thousands. And then I had all these people messaging me saying, when are you going to release all these bodysuits? And I was like, okay, wow. And I did. And they sold out in a week.
Wow. And was this still under your old brand?
The first range was, and then I thought, okay, now I've actually got to do something. I just quit or I put in everything I have and give it one last shot and rebrand and go.
So you had that option then to grow into a new brand. How did you get started with that? Where did the name come from?
So I decided that I had to rebrand because I decided Tippy and Zep. I felt like a lot of people had this and that as their name, kids' names or whatever they were, and I wanted something different. And I'd had my second daughter by then. I thought it was really unfair that her name wasn't part of it. So I knew I needed to do that. And it was at the time when Tippy was learning how to talk and she kept saying, give me Summi, Summi, Summi. And Khan said to me one day, if you ever do something, you have to call it Summi Summi. And I was like, yeah, that is cute. So that's how that came about. And then I was kind of like, I don't know though, it's so personal. Will other people think it's really weird? And I had to talk to a girl who's in the industry and I said, what do you think about this name? And she's like, what do you think about Google? Half of the brand names out there don't make any sense. And if they're strong, they stick. So I just went for it.
Going into the women's fashion world, I'm thinking back to the Ash that was designing that first baby kit and sending it off to the factory, this being a whole other kettle of fish and a bit of a learning curve. Where did you get started on finding your way through this, what I imagine is a very complex industry?
Well, the way I design things now is no different to back then. My whole factory still gets sent this mess of a design packet. I actually went over there a few years ago before COVID and I met the factory because I wanted to know that it was all, not children and it was legit. And I said, how do you create what's in my head from what I give you because it's a mess? And he said their factory is actually their family and his sister is a fashion designer and he sends my designs to his sister and she does them professionally. And I said, that's amazing because that costs thousands of dollars if I was to get a subcontractor to do that properly. How is that costed into my designs? How's that working? And he says, no, I take her out for dinner.
Oh, that's so sweet.
So he has me forever.
It's pretty rare to find humans like that, but I think when you do, it's definitely meant for you.
Yeah. And I've been told by so many people, you need more than one factory, you need options. And I was like, no, I don't know, something special there.
I think there's a lot to be said for that too. No discredit to the advice about protecting or the opportunity to scale up or whatever you need to do. It's all very relevant advice, but there's something to be said for just backing and keeping it in this space as it is now, keeping it special. And if anything changes, just rolling with what that change looks like at the time and trusting that process a little bit.
Yeah.
So at that stage, your bodysuit got onto the glorious body of Ruby Tuesday. Followers started to go through the roof. I guess you would have introduced them to the Summi Summi brand and started to evolve. What was happening then? What was the growth pattern like for you? And what were you learning through that period?
Yeah, so it kind of grew super fast with that. And then I did another collection and started wholesaling, very few stores to start with. And I still feel now like there'll be like a big burst and then it'll just plateau for a while. And then all of a sudden COVID happened and I wasn't sure how everything was going to pan out. And I felt like it did the reverse to me what it did to big companies. Like I skyrocketed. Well, those big companies crashed because they had so many outgoings where I had nothing. I was in my home office and I was working off like a pre-sale model. So I was cruising. Yeah.
That's very smart, doing a pre-sale.
Yes. At a small scale, it's fine. I don't think I could do it now. And I learned that the hard way, because if one thing goes wrong and you're 2 weeks late, it's a logistical nightmare. But yeah, I just felt like I was in the right place at the right time.
It sounds like it was meant to be. I'm really interested in the story of wholesaling, because I think often we hear about brands that start and they're kind of business to consumer model. So, you can control what your outlay is for the product, the cost, and then you can look at the profit margins and you can kind of work all that out fairly low key if you're only good at an Excel spreadsheet. But then when you got to get into wholesaling, it just blows my mind. Like, for example, with my ceramics, I've never gone down that path because I actually can't stand to do the work on it, working back and figuring out like the costs and then the margin to them, then the margin of resale, and then how do I resell? I just imagine that that's a real curly learning curve. What was your experience like figuring all that out?
So after COVID, then kind of plateaued and then kind of dipped back down. And it was actually just at the beginning of last year, I was back to thinking maybe I stop now, because to be honest, I had no idea what I was doing. And then I did one last collection and I thought, that's it, I'm done, really done. And a girl I knew from Cronulla, where I grew up, emailed me about a pair of pants she wanted to buy. I knew who she was. And at the bottom of her email, it was signed Kendi Agency. And I was like, oh, what's that about, Ken? What's agency is she with? And she had started her own wholesale agency. And so I emailed her and I was like, just by chance, are you taking on anyone? Like literally was my last ditch effort. And she was like, I love the brand, I want to take you on. It would be a dream. And that collection, she called me and she goes, I love your brand, blah, 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 but I can't sell this. Basically terrible.
What do you mean?
I know. She was like, where did it come from? And I had in my head that I just had to do something different. And she was like, no one wants different. No one's expecting this from you and it's not going to sell. And I was like, oh shit. And then we actually sat down and had this huge Zoom call. And she was like, you're not quitting. You've come this far. Let's turn the ship around. And within a year, I would say that it's tripled, business tripled.
It's so interesting that you say that you sort of steered from your creative norm or your creative vibe, just your general brand vibe, thinking, oh, I've got to push myself, I've got to do something different here. We're always reinventing the wheel, thinking that it has to be something else, thinking that people are watching us that closely as well and being like, oh, they must be bored with it just because I've posted it 1,000 times and listed it 1,000 times. They must want something different from me. But it's so interesting to hear your friend and your colleagues' feedback that no, it's all about that brand that you've built and that sense of style that the collections have and that the brand has. And you've got to just double down on that.
Yeah, and I think it's taken me this long to sort of understand what that identity was, because I'm working in an office by myself every day, flip-flopping around. No, I didn't really have anyone to bounce off, and I needed that.
So this whole time, have you been doing this just by yourself, just, mapping out the design, sending them off, getting them back? Has there been anyone creatively to inspire you through this?
More or less the first couple of years. And then actually I made friends with this girl called Stevie, who was amazing. And we just, those people that you just vibe with straight away. And she has this whole fashion background and she's really creative. And she was living with me for a while, but then she left. I was like, now what do I do? And then Sammy, the wholesale agent, came along. And now, funnily enough, we're all working together. So I still call Stevie all the time and she developed some of my prints. And I just feel like I now have this support of other people, which is
so important.
Yeah.
So as you were kind of going on that upward trajectory, things were going really well. I imagine a lot's coming in for you at that time. So like things are moving, you're responding. Tell me how that felt and if there was anything that tripped you up at that time that felt a little bit more challenging.
When COVID and that's when we started going up then, I think I probably got a little bit ahead of myself thinking, okay, we're up now. I wasn't expecting to go back down. And I've actually come to learn now that's business. It's up and then it's down. And since then, I actually hired a business coach and now understand the importance of budgets and cash flow and spreadsheets. But yeah, I think when we were going up, I didn't expect to go back down. That was the biggest sort of learning adjustment for me.
I imagine that emotionally and energetically, just showing up every day to do the work, it would have been pretty challenging when it's down.
Yeah. And also because when we were up, I did stupid things. Like I went and bought a really fancy car.
Of course.
Yeah. I was like, look at me, I'm killing it. And went back down. I was like, oh, not anymore. So, yeah. But I think those are all like learning things that you need to go through, because even my dad was like, don't be stupid, don't buy a car, blah, blah. And I was like, can't tell me what to do. And now I'm like, yeah, no, should have listened. Yeah. I don't know if that's the answer that you wanted.
It's perfect. I think that's so, it is a hard question, I know, isn't it? But, it's really interesting because there's so many, this happens a lot, when I get to the privilege of having these conversations with people who've started really exciting brands is, when you go back and you look at the trajectory, you look at the growth and you look at what's happened, a lot of it has been following instinct, and then it's doubling back and retrofitting the stuff you need. So you're like, oh, cool, go with the brand. Okay, hang on, let me double back and think about who my audience is, or, how they want to be spoken to. Okay, let me go do this now. And then, oh shit, I got to go back and learn about cash flows because my invoices are like saved here, there, and everywhere, and I don't know what's going on. That's such a common experience, I think. And it's just it's comforting to hear that, because what stops a lot of people from getting started is hearing about people who've got like these perfect business plans and these perfect rollouts and this stuff that happens. And then it's like, well, no, there are people like that. Yeah. But then there's also a huge majority of people who are just winging it and retrospectively figuring it out on the way back down. But it's, I guess, through that takes a lot of resilience to go, oh, okay, shit, I need to fix this to keep going. How do you keep that resilience up and that rage, I guess, to keep going with the brand?
I think it comes, I'm a Taurus and I'm super stubborn. I feel like I could have quit at least 5 times by now, but there's a voice in my head that's just like, nah, you're not, and you'll fix it and you'll get back up. I also feel like, and it's probably just my head talking, but I feel like a lot of people probably thought, as if this little brand is going to go anywhere. How cute for her for trying. And in my head, I'm like, no, I'm going to prove you wrong. So yeah, I just don't quit.
Oh, I love that. I feel like that's often when I record these podcasts, because as we talked about before we hit record, I do this because I just think it's really important to have really honest and real conversations about what happens when you go into business, when you're straddling 2 jobs, when you're straddling 3, when you're trying to figure shit out. And I always get a message that I need to hear in the podcast, and that might just be it, because there's because it's so easy to do it. You think, oh, I could just put this down and not do this anymore, but it's like, also it could be huge, so why don't we just give it a crack and prove it to anyone? I look, and we all think that people think a lot about us. I always imagine myself in a WhatsApp group, like, oh yeah, someone's definitely giving me shit about starting this podcast somewhere in a WhatsApp group. That person's the person I'm going to prove wrong. They probably don't exist. It's nice to have the push for yourself to go, do you know what, like I'm going to keep going and I'm going to go all in. The collections that you're producing are really beautiful, different, fun. I think in my opener, and before we were chatting, I said this as well, the collection, Good Thanks. Good Thanks is just a term that colloquially I use a lot, usually when things aren't good, or if I do something awkward, like, I never say something really awkward to my partner and then I'll just go, good thanks. Is that, I have to ask.
Is that how it started, actually? It was with Stevie, and I don't know, she said something to me and I was mumbling and ended up making no sense. And at the end of the sentence, I said, good, thanks. And we just both cracked up laughing. And it's just been like our little personal joke forever. Like, good, thanks. It's something that we always say.
I love that.
It felt natural to put it in somewhere.
I'm going to have to go back and buy something from Good Thanks just to like back myself. Tell me about the new collection, Mr. Hadimi. Is there a name, is there a story in that name?
Yes. So actually my partner's last name is, it's Hardemiolu, but for short it's Hardemi. And we were designing the collection, and he actually has a degree in visual design, I think, and he's really good with fonts, and he's actually a really good artist. So he just happened to be in the warehouse, and someone said, we need to do like a written print. It would look so cool. He was there, and I said, here's some paints, here's some paper, get going. I think he wanted to go for a surf. And I said, no, you'll sit down until you bang out something good. And then it actually turned into a competition, and he was writing his summies and I was writing mine. I liked one of his and I liked mine. So we put them together, and that's how that print was created. So it's sort of just named after him, Mr. Hardemy.
That's so cool. And so what happens with that process? So you write something down, then does it go off to the factory and they develop it into a material? Does that go elsewhere?
So we just hand painted that on paper, and I have a graphic designer. She lives in Yamba as well. So I just love all these people that come out of the woodworks and end up helping in some way, because I often think, Yamba, how am I going to find anyone here? Because everyone lives in the city. But I feel like just when I need someone, they appear, which is pretty cool. So Alex is a graphic designer, and she just took the things and put them together in a print file, and I send that to the factory. It's actually really funny. The first sample he made, he put them all upside down because it was handwritten. I was like, no, it's upside down. But yeah, and then the name of the collection, Sammy is my wholesale agent. We've become really good friends, and we just end up on a roll messaging back and forth, like the stupidest things, like some of the stuff we say. And then someone will just come out with a banger and we're like, yeah, that's it. So that's how that. Yeah.
I love that. We make the process over complex sometimes with what the creative process should be. It should mean something, ladder up to something. How is it speaking to a theme or whatever? But just the most beautiful art is sometimes just done in the moment, and it's just an expression of you, fun, energetic. And that's definitely the vibe that I get from all of your collections and everything you share. So it's cool to see, and it's cool to hear that that's exactly what's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, literally. It's just a hot mess back here.
It's a hot mess on this end of the phone too, don't you worry. You said something in your open about a cafe with your partner. So tell me when that came into it and why and how it all rolled out.
So the brand had already started, and at that point it was still just a hobby, like a little bit of play money on the side. And he had a job at the pub, but we both knew he couldn't be there that much longer, happily. And again, in a small town, it was like we had to do something or go back to Sydney. And there was this shop across the road from the pub that had been empty. I think it had been empty for 2 years or something. And it's out of the main strip. And that's probably why it was empty. And I said, we need that spot and we just need to go for it. So we did. And we opened a little cafe, and it's like a little cafe boutique. I've been there 3 years now.
And was that a big financial investment for you guys at the time?
Yeah, we took a loan out against our house, I think. Yep.
Oof, that would have been scary.
You know what? Like these huge, scary things, and I think it's both of us, things like that should scare us. We kind of just jump into it without thinking. Like we bought our first house up here after seeing it once. We were just like, yeah, we'll buy it, whatever. Yeah, we'll have a kid together, whatever. Yeah, we'll have another one, whatever. We just do it, deal with it later.
You got to go with your gut sometimes and just back yourself. So you've had that for 3 years. So did you have that cafe while COVID was going, and how was that experience?
We loved COVID. It was so nice. We got to stay at home. But no, it's been tough at times. And now that I'm with this full time, I don't get to work in there as much. So yeah, it's hard. It's such a hard juggle.
Yeah, I bet. But it's pretty cool that the label is able to afford you working on it full time. Are you at that stage where you can draw a regular wage from it and it's supporting you in some way?
Finally, because again, like I didn't know what I was doing and I made a mistake and I paid myself too much at one point. Before I had my cash flow spreadsheets and all of that, I was still winging it. And I learned that lesson very fast. And then when I finally got a handle on all of that, I could see, all right, well, this is when in the year that I can afford to do this, and this is when I shouldn't do this. Then I could actually finally start paying myself. And it's not huge. Everyone's like, oh, you must be killing it. And it's like, no, because I'd rather invest the money still at this point than take it. So that was a bit hard to learn.
I read something on LinkedIn today that we shouldn't be looking for the amount of money we can get. So we should be looking for the amount of money and working out the amount of money we need.
Yeah.
And then going from there. And that was a little bit of a vibe reset for me, just reading it. It's so simple, but when it's the keep up with the Joneses energy is the dominant, you're like more all the time. But it's like, well, actually, how much do you just need to live? And then Once you have that, when you stop wanting all the other stuff, what happens? You know, it sounds like when you did that, you're like, well, cool, I've got this, I'm good for now. I'm happy. Now I can reinvest. Now I can grow.
For sure. But it was really exciting when I actually did it properly. I was like, oh, and next year I could give myself a pay rise and that would be nice. And I won't actually run myself into the ground again. So you do need those boring spreadsheets in place. And I also feel like if you don't know how to do them on your own, like I didn't have a clue, there are people that can help you. So I feel like that help is necessary.
How do your days look now with a cafe that's also a boutique with a label with 2 kidlets? How are your days?
Crazy. Yeah, so Monday to Friday we just work. They're in school, and then actually it's really hard at the moment on the weekends. My partner and I have to work in the shop, so we're just juggling the kids with grandparents, which is kind of sad. We just want to be at home on the weekends with them, but for now that's what we have to do.
How do you balance your energy?
That's a good question. Well, I've actually found that it's really important to get in some kind of physical activity. It's really easy for weeks at a time to get wrapped up in everything that I have to do, and I get quite stressed. But if I just force half an hour of a run or whatever, it feels much better.
What do you think might be next for you with Summi Summi and with the cafe?
We would actually love to sell the cafe and be done with that, which I feel like will happen sooner or later. And I will keep going with Summi Summi. We're actually just starting to sort of dip our toes into the US market. I feel like it could be so huge, especially on the West Coast. It's such a coastal vibe. If we could do that and Khan could help me, Khan is a very good warehouse employee. If this could be our whole business, that would be everything. There could be like a men's range down the line.
Mr. Summi Summi?
Yeah, Mr. Summi Summi. Mr. Summi, that could be cool.
That sounds really cool. And it is a beautiful, bold, really bright range. Every collection that drops is very cool. And it does feel very capsule. It's not a huge, broad range and different versions of everything in a million different colors. It feels very elite. Was that an intentional choice for you, or was that something that kind of just happened?
I think it slowly developed, and certainly the collections have gotten so much bigger, and I felt like everything else was done. Like you spell sort of bohemian dresses. Those are done. I didn't need to do that because there's already such an offering of it. And so I'd go into a shop and I was like, well, what's missing was basics, but not in neutrals, bright basics, stuff that makes you feel happy. Like my friend Abby this morning was dropping off her kids to preschool and she was wearing one of our shirts that's like a bright yellow color. And I was like, you make me happy in that shirt. So that's just what I want to keep on doing.
Have you always had a huge love of color?
Probably not. I don't know where it's come from, to be honest, but it just makes me happy. I do appreciate a good neutral though.
Yeah, I'm ashamed to say if I open my wardrobe, I think you'd be really hard pressed to find something that wasn't in the white, grey, black, navy blue situation. So seeing the beautiful rack behind you, I'm like, wow, I really need to lift my game in the color space. So yeah, I can feel you on that. But I think creating something that just feels right and feels energetic for you is just such a cool place to be building something from. Sometimes it doesn't need to be any more complex than that in terms of identifying gaps or anything, just that energy behind something. This feels right for me. That makes me happy. What other reason in the world is there to do something? What do you wish you knew way back when you were first designing that cute little first kit, the first bodysuit for women? What do you wish you knew back then?
That I would get here, because it felt like it would never happen, literally. I actually remember saying to a friend one day, like, money makes money, and if you don't have it, you're not getting anywhere. And I remember saying, this person is successful because, they had money. This person was successful because they had money. And I just remember her saying, just keep going. And then I just remember not long ago, she said to me, remember when you said that to me? I was like, yeah, I do. And she goes, and look at you now. And I was like, yeah, okay. So that was a nice little pat on the back.
I love that. And look, it's never easy to share your story and to open the doors of your journey to listeners out there. And that's why this podcast exists, to lift the curtain, pardon the pun, given it's my last name, but spelled differently. But, you know, to lift the curtain on your business and be able to say, this is hard and a bit icky at times, but also really cool at times. They're like pretty well unplanned. It's not an easy thing to do. So I'm super grateful to you for showing us a little bit of behind the scenes of your journey. And I'm just so excited for you to see where it goes and to see it keep going. But before we sign off with you, I'd like to know how the listener and I can support you on your journey.
Oh, buy some Summi Summi. No, you know, always just Instagram, social media, like something, share something, save something, the interaction. Yeah.
I'm absolutely going to make sure that I put in the show notes your website so people can click straight through to buy, your Instagram as well to follow along. It has been such a pleasure to connect with you today, Ash, and have you on the show. Thank you for sharing your story with me.
Oh, you're so welcome. I feel like I just talked. I don't know if anything made sense.
Literally me in every episode, literally me listening back in every edit. It's just, you just run with it. Hey, like if one little piece lands for people as inspo, we've done our job.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
Thank you for listening to Unemployed and Afraid, the stories of starting over with your host, me, Kim Curtin. If you liked the episode and are keen to hear more, please hit the follow button and leave a review. And let's keep the conversation going on Instagram @unemployedandafraid, where there's more goodies and links to today's show notes. See you there.